This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 123 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. I'm going to die. Today, I'm going to do something different and play a rerun of an old show, episode 81, with Kristi Kiger. This is a weekend where, even as we speak, we are in the Smoky Mountains in a lodge that sleeps 42, almost 30 of us, all wonderful, crazy, brilliant, insane, healthy, unhealthy people. Our common denominator is this show, and we are doing kind of our first annual retreat. Hopefully it's annual. I'm not real sure if it'll ever happen again. I have no idea what the future is for this show at all. In fact, I may be going to every other week. I don't know. I'm just kind of really strapped right now, but I didn't have time to put together a show, but I wanted to feature Kristi because Kristi has really been around from the beginning, a faithful listener and contributor. And on this weekend retreat, she volunteered to do a lot, helped with the, planning of the beds. In a lodge of 42 beds, we had about 30 people and, yeah. So I think a normal conference where people can run and hide into their hotel rooms and the conference center is like downstairs. This is a big house, 3-story house where, and it might be raining outside, which is like trapped. And we're going to be with, 29 other people that we barely know and mostly only know from online relationships. So, I don't know how it's going, but it's happening as this is releasing. So without further ado, this is episode 81 with Kristi Kiger, and you're going to enjoy hearing Bob again from the old days. And I'm just going to play the whole thing beginning to end, so you're going to hear the old intro and everything. Here we go. Oh, by the way, next week, Ryan Bell is my guest, and it'll be the 3rd time I've had him on, I think. And, that's a good talk. See you out there.
I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
The church has not cornered the market on hospitality, being genuine, on all of these things that, again, got attributed to church or the Holy Spirit. These random cycling people have just invited me to their cabin in West Virginia, right? It's like hosting a biking weekend, you know? And so I end up in these places, meeting people, sharing time, sharing space, and not wasting any of that time doing things that you do on retreats.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to episode 81 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Dr. Bob and I converse with Kristi Kiger. She's a longtime friend of the show, a Patreon supporter. We started the show with the subtitle, We Interview People You Don't Know About a Subject No One Wants to Talk About, What's Not to Like. And Kristi is one of those that doesn't have a book or a blog. She's a nurse with a big heart for people broken on the wheels of life and an avid social justice worker. Kristi is what I consider a new deconverter. It was only about 6 months ago that she graduated to the status of post-Christian non-theist. So the feelings are still pretty fresh. Like many good-hearted people, she found Christianity attractive as a vehicle by which she could make the world a better place. It was not shoved down her throat as a child. She chose it as a young adult through high school and college and worked 10 years for a Christian nonprofit outreach in Washington, D.C. But people who enter religion in pursuit of love and justice will often find that pursuit hitting the wall of conditional love and justice, for which the Christian church is infamous. We taped this talk on January 10th, 2016. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, most podcast platforms. If you're feeling grateful for our podcast, Patreon.com is like a per-episode tip jar for our work, and we greatly appreciate our Patreon supporters. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube called Towering Mountain of Ignorance by Hank Green. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. All other music is written and performed by me. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. So, Kristi Kiger, where are you calling from?
I'm in Baltimore at the moment.
No kidding. How's the weather there?
Amazing, because it's almost 60 degrees.
You're kidding.
No kidding. God bless
Yeah.
you. Oh, boy.
It's a little bit raining and almost 60.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit raining and below freezing here in Murfreesboro, so it's a cold morning here.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We've had an unusually warm winter so far.
Yeah, that's true. Well, here, too. But did you watch the Nurse Jackie show on Showtime? You ever watch that show? Pretty good.
I have seen a couple of episodes of that, and I just noticed that it went up on Netflix.
Yeah.
So I am, I would like to see it.
Yeah.
I think we watched clips from it in some class in nursing school.
Oh, really? Well, it's been on for 7 seasons, and now we binge watched the whole thing last night.
Really?
It's only a half-hour show. And we saw the first 6 seasons. We didn't see the 7th. So we just watched the whole thing. It was good.
Golly.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. And boy, drug addicts, they can't kick it. You know, it's so hard. When they lose everything and still they can't get off.
So you bring that up because she's a nurse, right?
Yeah, that's the only reason. I thought maybe somebody saw that.
So what kind of nursing do you do, Kristi?
I work at a clinic, a community-based clinic in D.C. I actually work in research, so I do clinical trials for HIV treatments.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. So, and you've been listening to our podcast for a while, huh?
I have. I discovered it early last year. Huh. And then, I think I've listened to every episode up until, I have a few queued up now from December or something. So.
Wow. Well, thanks. We appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So how did you find it? Do you know?
I do know. Last January, early January, Ryan Bell came up on my NPR homepage. And I'd never heard of him before. I didn't know anything about it, but it was his year mark after his year without God. So it was like there was something about his conclusion. And so I hadn't heard anything about it. And so I went to his blog and kind of, saw how it started and then kind of skimmed through things. And then I started looking for interviews with Ryan. So I just searched iTunes and listened to every interview with Ryan that I could find. Wow. And among those were yours. Yeah. And it was one of my favorites. And so then I started listening to, other episodes of the podcast as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great.
So the fact that Ryan's story appealed to you, and the fact that you're on the show, and there's no mystery as to why you're here, is that you have a religious backstory that is similar to mine or, a lot of the guests that we've had on, and that's why this show exists. So let's get to that, I guess. Let's start there. What's your religious backstory?
Yeah, so I grew up in the church, not particularly religious, but my parents were from the Midwest and they moved to Los Angeles, and I was born in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But they had really strict religious backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And my mom in particular was from a really fundamentalist church. And so when they moved to LA and started moving away from some of that, but then we were involved in a church and that was our kind of, social circle.
Do you remember the denomination?
Oh, yeah. It's Presbyterian.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is relatively liberal compared to a lot of churches,
Yeah. So the church now, so I don't remember the two branches of Presbyterian, but it was on the more conservative branch.
Oh, okay. All right.
But my parents would say, like my dad and I have talked about this, and he said at that time for them, it was a good place for recovering fundamentalists. And so that was not fundamentalist to them, right? It was a move away from that. And later, part of the reason my parents ended up leaving the church was because it was becoming more conservative. Oh. So my parents ended up leaving the church when I was maybe in junior high or so. And I would still go to youth group. Sometimes somebody would pick me up and take me to youth group or something like that, But it just sort of, I won't tell their story, but it kind of faded out of their lives. And then when I was 14, I went on a mission trip with this church down to Mexico over Memorial Day weekend. Mm-hmm. So it was a combined high school and college trip, and we went down and we hung out with kids in an orphanage and painted over graffiti and slept in tents on the beach, that kind of thing. And on that trip, that was kind of the big marker for me when I decided myself that I wanted to be back involved with church and started pursuing it on my own. So from early high school all the way on for 20 years, I was the most religious person in my family.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. So I really felt like it was something that I chose and was sort of proud of the fact that it wasn't like my parents' faith, that I felt like it was really mine and I chose it and I owned it.
I have that exact story.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. My parents were raised Presbyterian, and I'm the one that got radical. And I really kind of pushed the rest of them, including my sisters, to be more religious than they were before.
Yeah. And how'd that work out for you? Not very well.
Honestly, I was on top of the world for the first 39 years of my life, as far as rocking this thing, man.
Yeah.
I was a fairly successful evangelical minister. As far as lots of salvations and conversions, and everywhere I went, I grew the church. And then, there's that embarrassing moment when you do the never mind.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Kristi. When was the great unraveling for you, or the trigger moment, as some people call it?
Right. So I basically stayed in the church and church-related activities for throughout college and after college. I used to work for my church in the summers. Summers in college, I ran youth programs. And then I ended up, when I moved what originally brought me out to DC was I came out to do an internship when I was in college for a Christian human rights organization. And then through that, I got connected to a program that's a postgraduate Christian fellowship program for a year. So I graduated, and then I came out to DC to do this postgraduate sort of Christian discipleship program. And we took seminary classes and had Bible study and had internships as well. And my internship was at a small community-based nonprofit that was also faith-based. And that ended up turning into my job for the next almost decade. So I worked with a small Christian nonprofit. Sort of my angle on things was always social justice.
Yeah,
so that was really what brought me into the church.
Yeah. Hey, Kristi, have you heard this most recent episode of Ryan Bell's show with Bart Campolo?
I have not.
Okay, that's his most recent interview.
Okay.
But have you heard of Bart Campolo?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know his story as far as one of the reasons he signed up to Christianity was it was the vehicle where people were loving one another and they were doing great work. And, when you have a machine and really a juggernaut with power and money, and you end up using it to do good things, and a person like yourself comes along with this huge bleeding heart.
In a nice way.
Yeah, no, I don't mean that. Yeah, but just a big heart.
Yeah,
and you see them doing great work, and I can see where that would, in a way, be the first appeal. It's like I can serve here, I can be utilized here, and the fact that they believe X, Y, and Z it's fine. It fits within my grid. In fact, if this is what motivates us, then great.
Let's go. Yeah,
a God of compassion, and Jesus is the picture of the suffering servant.
Suffering servant, yeah.
And I can see where, and I think one of the points, and the reason I bring up that interview is that Bart was like, we've got to become the people that do and we're decades, we're generations away from having the money and the momentum that Christianity has had for 2,000 years to build these machines through which and by which great social justice work is done. So anyway.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I will definitely listen to that, and I have followed his story a little bit.
He's so inspirational. It ends every time I hear him talk. I mean, he's still a preacher at heart.
Campolo,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And his dad, Tony Campolo, was. He was one of the people that I followed, like when I was in the movement.
Absolutely, one of the biggest voices for social justice within Christianity is Tony Campolo.
Right.
Now, so Kristi, here you are, a nurse, a scientist, really, right?
Right.
And then you're involved in the social justice stuff. And how in the world did you reconcile that? Did you compartmentalize it in some way where, okay, I'm a scientist here, but over here I'm somebody else?
It's a good question because I actually just went back to school for nursing in 2011. And that all sort of corresponded with what I now see as my deconversion. So some of it was science, but just like kind of my into the church was social justice and loving people. My, I think, initial linchpin that came out was homosexuality. So I really started to back away from the church because
of their stance,
of the stances that were not loving people and not just. And I would say that was the area that I tried to do kind of the most intellectual gymnastics for was trying to reconcile homosexuality and Christianity. And I mean, I am a straight white female, but two of my very dearest friends who I've known since kindergarten and first grade are minority gay men. And so over time, when I loved them and supported them in their long-term healthy relationships, I had a lot of dissonance over that. So that was kind of the biggest emotional thing for me, I think, in terms of leaving the church. And then as I started to back away, then I allowed myself more,
permission to think and to let the science that you were exposed to confront,
Yeah, and I don't know, I was kind of before, like, well, evolution, I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. You know, like these Christian ways that they've figured out to sort of go with things like, oh yeah, well, birds' beaks change, but like monkeys don't turn into humans type thing, you know? But in school, I mean, most of the science stuff really came later for me, because in terms of my deconversion, like it really was the social stuff. Yeah. But in nursing school also, like, I mean, I wasn't sheltered before, and I was well traveled, and I studied abroad in Mexico and Costa Rica, and like, you know, I mean, I've been exposed to the world. It's not like I was really sheltered, but my social circles, like I chose Christian evangelical social circles, you know? So when I was in nursing school, I really just was in a different pool of people in a lot of concentrated time in a different way than I had ever been before. Because I never worked in a non-Christian environment, even like in terms of a job, you know?
So, Kristi, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have one sister.
So how out are you to your parents and your sibling as an atheist?
I do not believe that they would utilize the word atheist for me or have an idea that that was really, but they know that I have left the church. Both of my parents are like, yeah, we're out of established religion. I mean, for a long time, I was concerned about them, right? And so now I'm like, hey, I like joined your ranks in terms of like, I'm done with the organized church. But both of my parents are still spiritual. And my mom, who also has a background in nursing, has gotten into like the holistic health movement and kind of Eastern philosophy and stuff like that. My dad kind of maintains like Judeo-Christian sort of worldview, but doesn't have any doctrine, you know? And
well, you know, we just talked to a guy this week who he's a fan of the show, but he wishes that we were less emphasis on the word atheist and more on the word humanist. Right. Because, you know, really, the truth is that nobody likes to identify by what we don't believe in.
Right.
And so...
yeah, it's definitely a hard thing semantically. I generally, especially when I'm telling people... so I've been very open with people individually. I have not made, like, a big Facebook announcement like, hey, friends, I'm an atheist, you know? But, like, when I have had the opportunity to have real conversations, then I've been very honest with people. But I have only identified as an atheist for like 6 months or something. So this is new for me. I mean, it was very gradual. Like I left the church, but I still kind of had an idea that I would go back.
So even when you heard of Ryan Bell and started, you know, tracking down interviews and heard our interview with him, you were still on the fence there.
Yeah. I don't ever remember questioning seriously whether or not God existed. Like, even though I had taken seminary classes and, like, done apologetics and stuff like that, in my mind, that really wasn't a question. So when I was leaving the church, I did not consider that I was leaving God.
Right.
Like, I was just trying to figure out the establishment. And so after last January, getting into Ryan's stuff, and also one of the things that I loved was Julia Sweeney's monologue.
Yeah, letting go of God,
letting go of God. And so then it just took a while for me to say I no longer identify as Christian.
Kristi, did you have the same problem that Cass had? I mean, he was in it for a long time, and then eventually there was the triggering moment or a slow fade to something else. But boy, he was awfully angry. He was really pissed off, you know, that he had been sucked into this thing for all those years, you know. Did you feel that?
I don't think I've had like a real major burst of anger. There are things that I am angry about or frustrated about. There are things that when I think about, like, when I was a young professional right out of school, I was tithing, right?
Sure.
And I would have paid off student loans had I not been giving this percentage of my money to the church. And I wasn't even in a church that was like, you have to tithe 10%, or, you know, I did my like my own Bible studies and like things and figured this out and just like made this decision. But so there's some things like that I feel like, stunted me.
Damn. Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like I did limit myself in terms of just knowledge and learning. And because I always studied within this Christian context, I felt like I was learning and growing, and I was in a certain way, but only in a very limited pool, but then part of me too just has to say, but this was my path.
Sure.
Like at that time, that's what brought me peace.
Right.
And
no regrets, no shame. And it is what it is, and you move on. Yeah. So you're a cyclist, and I've seen a lot of photos on your Facebook of you in various 100-mile, long races. And, and I don't know, I've already noticed your big heart, and you're a cyclist, and you could be out on, some beautiful, landscape on your bicycle. And I know historically we would kind of have these warm and fuzzy feelings about, the Creator, God, and I'm close, I'm friends with God, and I know, like, we just did a show where we interviewed my son, and he has a very scientific and evolutionary picture of life, and it is through that lens that he sees, like, he's an outdoorsman too, and he sees the beauty of his own life, of trees, of the world. And I don't know, I'm just bringing that up to see, like, in the transition from theism to non-theism, where do you go with those warm, fuzzy emotions, and, how do we connect with that which is the beauty of nature and in a non-theistic way, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. My experience has been that things mean more to me now. And I know a lot of people, when they lose their faith or stop believing in God, feel like there's this huge loss in those kind of areas. Yeah. And to me, I kind of was like, okay, I can stop trying to make all of these pieces fit together that don't fit, right? So I didn't have to explain everything to myself through this particular lens. With nature and beauty, I just think it's still amazing, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of my experience was that when I took God out of the picture, really, like, nothing changed. And that was part of what made me decide that he wasn't there, right? So, I mean, when I sort of did, a similar kind of year without God, as many people have said, but, like, didn't call it that or didn't, but I just, like, I stopped going to church. I stopped praying, and I was like, my life is not different in any kind of way that these claim to change your life, right? So I was like, prayer was a really big thing for me too. I was like, it just does not seem to matter whether you do it or not, right?
Yeah,
like, good things happen, shitty things happen, like, it's just life, and people would say, oh, but what about all those prayers that were answered in our women's group or whatever, and I'm like, people get married, people have babies, like, people find jobs, right? Like, this is what happens in the world, and we just chose to attribute every good thing to God, right? And so when I stopped doing that, when I stopped praying, for example, and again, I wasn't even really asking the question, does God exist? At that point, I just was like, well, maybe prayer doesn't really do anything, right? Or, like, it's more about it changing our hearts and giving us peace or whatever. And then, then that it's not actually making physical changes in the world. And, I kind of just gradually moved away from that as well.
And I think what I hear you saying, and what I've experienced myself, and especially even as recent as this week, this is like a fresh epiphany of sorts, is that there's no need or reason for God. And because, in a way, God's kind of gotten off the hook all these years, because if bad things happen, he's mysterious. Right. But if good things happen, he gets credit. And then if you negate that person or that entity altogether, the same bad things happen and the same good things happen. And in a way, one of the hardships, and I think maybe this part of what you were saying, Kristi, is that you got tired of having to piece together pieces that didn't fit, is, especially in the nursing world, maybe you're confronted with a lot of injustice. It's like, this is not fair that this person has this disease or this person dies and that person doesn't. And actually, no matter how hard their family prayed, nothing happened.
Right.
And so the hard part is trying to prop up God when suffering is occurring and he seems to be absent. And then
and these phrases like God doesn't make mistakes, and then you take genetics and you're like you cannot deny these mistakes. You can't, like, this, like, we understand these things now. And that was where science started coming in for me too, was not even so much on like evolution and things like that, but I'm like, we don't have to attribute these things to God. Like, we know why this happens. This person has a messed up chromosome, right? Like, it's not like, and thinking about how these things have been explained, over the centuries from before. I mean, Jesus, if he existed, like, didn't know about germs, right? Yeah. Like, just straight up didn't even know. And so you have these biblical things about, like, washing your hands or, being clean, but that was all about holiness. Like, that didn't have anything to do with, like, health, for example.
Right.
So you get to these, you're like, we totally understand so much and do not need explanations or to continue say that this is a blessing or this is a curse or this is a miracle. Like, we can work with the science and know what went wrong or what went right or how to fix things, And obviously some things are still inexplicable, and that's fine. We don't understand them.
Yet.
I just decided that I no longer have to figure out how to attribute these things.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, I feel like, taboo, but one of the things also in my experience that took me away from prayer was issues of fertility, and not in my own life, but in the lives of friends and primarily women in the church. And so as I got into my early 30s and had so many friends having basically a very broad spectrum of experiences on the fertility spectrum, right?
Right.
But people still basically maintaining this, like, Old Testament, God opened Sarah's womb and he closes this. And I'm like, no, we know about sperm counts, right? Like, we know about eggs being released from your body. Like, you can say that God is in charge of those things, but do I really believe that God is personally interfering in a man's sperm count? Like, do I really believe that God is personally interfering with your egg coming out of your ovary? Like, you have to take it to that level, right? And then in terms of prayer and stuff, like, it just became so... Everybody would say, and I've always had a heart for adoption. I have not adopted. I have ended up being involved with various children in various ways. And that was a big, issue for social justice and stuff for me as well. And people would just always, when they come to this fertility, even though they would be cheerleaders for adoption on the sidelines or something, then when it came to them, they're like, we just... really don't feel like God is calling us to adopt.
Sure. Yeah.
We really don't believe God is done building our biological family, And I'm like, just say you don't fucking want to adopt. Like, just say it. Just say, I want a baby and I'm going to pay $20,000 to this fertility doctor to make it happen.
Yeah.
Like, don't clothe that in because this is what God has for us.
Yeah. Did you have issues with things like abortion and what are the things that people care about?
Well, even contraception,
those kind of things. Yeah,
it's obviously a really hard one.
Yeah, sure.
I would say that I was always pro-life, in the sense that I did not want people to have abortions.
Sure.
I wanted people to choose not to have them, but I was never really strongly pro-life in the legal sense, right? Like, I felt like people should be able to have abortions, even though if I were personally counseling them, I would want them to choose otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that one-size-fits-all kind of thinking is not, I mean, that's just wrong. It's very disrespectful, first of all, and it's incorrect.
I think it's dead on to say, I mean, nobody's pro-abortion, period.
No.
Nobody.
No.
Right.
Absolutely.
And to think that we're pro-abortion just because we want to keep it legal is...
Right.
Not true.
Although there was an article recently or a blog or something. I'm trying to think of who it was. Some celebrity or somebody spoke out and specifically said, we need to stop saying that we're not pro-abortion as if it has to be a bad thing. So they're in the sense that, they were trying to say, let's take this stigma away and the taboo away, that we all have to still say that it's a bad thing, even if people choose it, you know?
Yeah. I think I saw that. I think I saw that same thing, and I know exactly what they're talking about.
Right. I wouldn't say I'm all the way in that camp, but
it's pretty extreme, but
I mean, it is a painful process for people, whether it's morally right or wrong, or you're murdering or not murdering, or whatever you believe about it. Like, it is always a difficult process, right? Mm-hmm. So, of course, it is something that we want to minimize, because people don't want to live with regret. They don't want to have to think about what if, or, you know, my baby would be this old at this time if this hadn't happened. You know, I mean, so it's hard. It's emotionally hard.
It's huge,
it can be
huge issue,
hard.
very hard.
Yeah.
So I think what that person was thinking was, this is a concession that we've been giving them as far as just granting them, this is a bad thing. And in fact, that in itself, or at least has partially contributed to what we would call maybe the shaming, or at least the silence that most women who have had abortions are compelled to stay in the closet about it, because you don't go shouting it around for several reasons. Number one, I mean, it's very personal, nobody's business. Number two, you could get slut-shamed for it. Number three, there's this stigma that I think that's what this person's trying to push back against, the stigma of it being a bad thing across the board. Yeah. Whereas I think, if I remember correctly, that person and other people have come out and said, I don't know that anybody could ever say, I'm glad I had an abortion, but they are in the sense that, okay, I did get pregnant, didn't want it, and so yes, I am glad that I had an abortion. And
you can say that was the right, given the circumstance, that was the right choice for me at that time. And I think I made the right choice, right?
Yeah. It's a very nuanced subject.
Yeah, and what about all these political types? There you are in Washington, D.C., and you see them standing on the floor of the House of Representatives saying, we're going to stick a wand up this woman's vagina. Mm-hmm. What the hell?
Right.
I mean, how do you? Yeah, I said this before, and I told Cass as well. If I was a woman, I would be pissed off constantly, just pissed off the way people treat me. You know what I mean? Or these guys in power who have not a clue treating me, and you know. I'm sorry, I'm ranting here, but it just really is annoying.
I'm of the sort that men should not even have a vote on this.
Yeah.
No, I am. It's women's health issues, and men are not allowed to vote.
I understand that position. I don't want to get really political here or anything, but men are still fathers of unborn fetuses.
Yeah.
So I think that it's. I don't want to get too political.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I just think that there is an impact on a father as well. If he knows that the woman is pregnant and that is his child, and then she aborts, like that takes an emotional toll on the father as well.
Yeah.
True.
So I think that that's a valid to have.
It's just not attached to his body. That's all.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. So we've touched on a couple of things. We got your story. How about your sibling? We never really got the clarity on whether your sibling knew where you were, or are they religious, or?
Well, yeah. It's funny because she was by far the least religious always, and was not interested in youth group by the end of high school, and wasn't involved in any sort of Christian fellowship in college or anything. But she is now converted to Catholicism, sort of via her husband's family, and they have 3 kids, and the kids are going to Catholic school.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know to what degree she believes the supernatural as much as she's chosen this culture and this community. So she's now the most religious in the family, but not in any kind of way that imposes on anybody else. And I think the only conversation I can think of having with her regarding sort of specific supernatural beliefs is the transubstantiation.
Oh, yes. That's the sacrament.
And she has told me she's like, I don't understand why we can't just say this is symbolism, right?
Yeah.
So in the evangelical church, there's more leeway about what you do and don't believe. You kind of have these like essentials, but then, there was a quote about that, I'm trying to think, that was basically just like grace in all things, not essential, but there was more to it. But with the Catholic Church, and one of the reasons I like never could have become Catholic, it's because you have these stances that are the only acceptable stances to take, right?
Right.
And I was always like, the Pope thing doesn't make any sense. It's, as a Christian, I was like, it's totally not biblical. And what's this infallibility? And then studying the history of Pope stuff. And if you study the history of contraception in the church and what the popes have said at what political times in history, and you see how much the Pope is totally political. And then once they have said these infallible things, then the church has to continue to maintain them. Right. So for me, I could have never chosen to be under an authority that I didn't believe in. Right.
Yeah.
For my sister, she holds things a lot looser. Like, she doesn't have any problem with contraception. Right. Even though technically she belongs to a church that the party line is that contraception is wrong. So she can be in it and hold things loosely. I am way too uptight for that. Like, I just could not be under an authority that I really, didn't support.
For those, Kristi, for those who don't know about the Catholic notion of transubstantiation, it's the belief that upon the ringing of the bells and the saying the magic words, that the body and blood of Christ is right there in front of you.
It's the Eucharist. It changes from a wafer to the actual flesh.
Actual body and blood, and you have to
grape
believe
juice
that.
To blood.
Yeah. So that's a tough one.
And I never got that, because even before science, even before you could say like this DNA didn't change, like crackers and flesh have very different textures. Like, I don't know how you could say, I was like, and it doesn't happen until it goes into the esophagus and you can't feel it anymore? I don't know, but I just really definitely know the difference between crackers and flesh.
Yeah, I thought about that too. There was a time in human evolution where if we wanted to run as fast as the gazelle, we killed it, we grabbed a piece of its meat and ate it. And we would be by so doing, we would have that thing. So I'm sure that's part of it, wouldn't you think? You eat you literally eat Jesus to have him inside you. So there's no allegory there. It's
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those kind of ideas have progressed me further and further in my movement away from the church, like studying old mythology and how many like Christ figures there were, and how almost nothing about Jesus' story is unique, even though in the church I know how much we said this is different than anything else that ever was or is, right? But it's really not. Nope. And it's interesting to see how those ideas got incorporated. And, as a Christian, I remember people saying, oh, well, Christmas was really a pagan holiday, and the Easter Bunny, it's pagan fertility and this and that. But when you're in it, there's just a way to make everything fit and justify everything.
Yeah, because that's the reason we got in it in the first place. It's the reason that it was invented in the first place, is the human need to be right, the human need to know. The human need to say, I've got the whole world in my hands by believing in the God who has the whole world in his hands. I'm on the right side of truth. I'm on the right side of the God versus Satan. I'm in, and I've got the answers. And don't bother me with the facts from then on, because the comfort blanket and the pacifier is in the mouth, and it's like don't don't bother me from there on out.
Yeah,
and it is a courageous move. I know people maybe shrink back from that word. I've heard even Ryan Bell say I didn't see it as courageous, but I do. I see it as courageous when people start to say, wait a second. And we've talked about groupthink and herd mentality and mob mentality on this show just recently. We just talked about it with John, I think. And
I do, just like Christianity was my way that I connected to people and found community and dove deeper into life. it was all of that fell apart, that took me away from the church, you know? So when I was at a point where now I felt like it divided me from people, like my best friends who are homosexual, you know, and no matter how much I loved them, if I intellectually was maintaining this belief that something was wrong, you can't 100% love somebody, right? And I was having that experience in different realms where I felt like I was, instead of experiencing that community and togetherness that I like jumped on board for, I was like, this is separating me from so much and is actually preventing me from fully loving people, because people, whatever people's problems were, friends, you know, talking to them, and in my head having to maintain, well, you sinned, or, you know, if you had followed Jesus, or like if you had this or that, like, or you're not complete, you know, like having these sort of feelings about people, even if in your words and action, like you're being a good friend, it's hard to look at somebody and think, I have to in some way maintain that you are incomplete because you don't have this piece that I think you should have.
Right.
I think that's obvious that, and it is now, but I think it's very powerful to even repeat, and that is that you saw that you could be a better person, you could be more moral, you could be more loving without this baggage, without this thing, which in some ways is maybe, you know, part of what introduced morals to you, and now you can see that maybe, and I don't, you know, for a season. Maybe it did help you become a better Kristi Kiger, you know.
Right.
But then after a while, you're saying like this. Now it's dead weight, and it's holding you back.
And Kristi,
I think that's very much the case.
Speaking of that too, what about Sheol or Hades or hell? You know, and heaven too, but hell in particular, because that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people. What do you think about that? Where does that fit into the
that
equipment?
was also definitely something that I was like on a slippery slope from, right? So like okay, well I don't.
Well, you're around death so much too, probably as a nurse.
Sure, absolutely.
I work in primary care and now, so I am not so much, but nevertheless. So I think even as in the later years of my Christianity, I had largely let go of hell. So I would have considered myself an inclusivist for a long time, which meaning that anybody who is actively and earnestly seeking God gets in, right? Which I believe was actually C.S. Lewis's position.
I think so, yeah.
And so even though I was in a church that was conservative and certainly didn't believe that, you just can't travel to India and be like, this whole place is going to hell, right? Like, except these 4 people that I talk to because they say Jesus, you know, like, and so I kind of became an inclusivist, but then even the worst of the worst, because in Mormonism, you know, they have like various levels and and there's some appeal to that, because you're like, if you're like super in, you get this super great heaven, and then if you're, you know, and then it's only like the worst of the worst that go to hell. But even to me, the idea that the worst conceivable person, which of course everybody, like Hitler is going to be this example, right? Yeah. Even the thought that Hitler would actually physically be tortured for eternity does not feel just to me. No, it's not. Because he was a product of time and circumstance also. Right? So, like, I just couldn't even say the worst of the worst deserve hell. Right. Again, it was just those intellectual gymnastics of trying to say what may or may not, you know, be allegory. And so then it was like, Jesus is enough for everything. Like, he covers it all. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do or believe or don't believe. Like, Jesus is just going to make it all right. I think that was where I most, like, I was at the end of my Christianity, was just this, like, Jesus is enough. Sure. Even if you don't believe him. If you do believe him, all the better because it's going to enhance your life and you get to be in truth and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so letting go completely of hell and in the end was really a release for me.
Felt good.
I bet it did.
Yeah, and a lot of people I also hear though say things like that when they no longer believe in heaven and hell, that they have lost a sense that justice will be done in the end.
I'm sorry, but those are the assholes. Those are the motherfucking assholes, because this whole sense of, oh God, I just go nuts.
I mean, I never took comfort in that, right?
No.
So, but there is this sense of like, oh, I suffered now, and so, but the bad guys will suffer later, and I'll get good stuff later, right? Exactly. So, I understand the appeal of that, but you're right. Like I said, I don't even think that Hitler deserves to burn for eternity.
Yeah. What about heaven then?
If I'm not concerned about who's getting to heaven and who's not, I don't really need to figure it out anyways. Like currently, I don't believe that there's something there, right? But I also don't believe that I'm going to hell. So, like, I could only just have a pleasant surprise at the end, right?
Okay. Whatever.
So I don't put a lot of stock in it, you know?
I get it.
So you mentioned in your email that cycling had a role to play in your deconversion from Christianity. What do you mean by that?
Endorphins.
Yeah. Yeah, be careful. Cycling is a very slippery slope. For me, it was the time that I had pulled away from church a lot, which initially just happened in nursing school because of time. Like I went to an intensive program and I told my pastor,
busy.
like, you're not going to see me for like a year and a half, right? But I mean, I was willing in that because I knew I was already starting to move away as well. After nursing school, I kind of tried to convince myself to like dive back into church and, you know, get plugged in again and that kind of thing, because I had time for community again in outside of school.
Well, and you know what you can always do as well is you can also say to yourself, the reason that I'm falling away is because a grape that's no longer on the vine is going to wither. And maybe my withering is because I've been out of church for a year and a half. And this is the story you can tell yourself too.
Absolutely.
Is my unraveling of my faith, is that healthy or unhealthy? And am I on a good path and I need to keep going, or do I need to go back to church because I'm fixing to drown here? I'm drowning my own faith.
Yeah.
And even though
I'm
torn, it feels good, it feels like the right thing, but I could be doing the wrong thing just because I have been out of church for a year and a half, and so it's very
and it's really it's fear that drives that mentality.
Sure,
like if you don't stay in, like of course you're going to get pulled away, and if you say that Satan's doing this or that, or whatever.
Have you ever heard the metaphor that like a stick? You take a stick out of the fire, and it's this red glowing ember on the end of it. You put it over here away from the fire, and it goes out.
Right.
And then as soon as you stick it back in, it starts glowing again. And so this is one of the stories the church leaders will tell you, that you need to stay.
Right. And it generates fear of discovering something
of my
else
ember going
outside
out.
Of there. Yeah. So with biking, that was really the first thing outside of church where I really started to find community. And I'd never been like on a sports team or anything before. And I always have done sort of solo activities like swimming and rollerblading and things like that, like not team stuff. And cycling is interesting because it's an individual activity, but there's a lot of group camaraderie to it as well. And so you can do it by yourself. You can do it in a group. You can go on these huge group rides where 7,000 people, go off and ride together, right? And I'd never done anything like that before. And I still pretty much, like you asked about kind of wonder and stuff, I pretty much tear up at every mass start. Like at the beginning of a ride.
At every what?
Mass start.
Oh, mass start. Okay.
Oh, yeah, mass start. Like when you're all at the starting line and you're about to go on this 30, 40, 100-mile ride, whatever it is. There is something really amazing about that energy. And when I started to have these, what felt like almost like supernatural or Holy Spirit or beyond, it was like I had these experiences that was not connected to church, that before when I was in at Urbana in a room of 20,000 people and singing, you attribute that energy that you feel to the Holy Spirit. Yeah. And I'm like, hey, guess what? I'm in Virginia at a starting line about to cycle and I feel this. Yeah. Right.
Well, and so, the old Christian would have said, this is proof that God is everywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
In which case, you have to be totally pantheistic or have a, I don't know the specific terms, but then it's common grace.
So you went to Urbana?
Oh yeah, I went to Urbana.
Were you in InterVarsity or?
I was.
Yeah,
I was
so was I.
In college.
Yeah, me too.
So I was at Urbana 2000 because I think that what happened was that the year when they do it every 4 years was supposed to fall on 99. Yeah. But you bring in the new year at Urbana, and there was the whole Y2K scare, and they didn't want 20,000 kids, students all together when it turned
when the lights went out
2000. Yeah.
What is
so they postponed it a year. So I was there 2000 when it became 2001.
Yeah. Okay. So you're at the starting line. Well, and my wife and I just watched A Walk in the Woods last night with Robert Redford and Nick Nolte, and it's mostly just kind of almost a documentary about the trail, the Appalachian Trail. And the funny thing about that is it's very similar in the way that it's an individual walk, but you stop at lodges and you stop at water break places and you're meeting people the whole time, and I can see the camaraderie in the community of the cycling community being very similar.
Yeah, and in DC we have a really vibrant cycling community, and I'm in a really active Facebook group, and so we also have coffee clubs, and we do social rides that are to get ice cream and stuff like that, Yeah. So I started to build community, like I said, in a really different context. And part of that was this realization, and that sounds ridiculous, but that the church does not have, has not cornered the market on hospitality, on being genuine, on, all of these things that, again, got attributed to church or the Holy Spirit. It was these random cycling people have just invited me to their cabin in West Virginia, right? And before, it was this nice lady in the church just invited me to her, lake house or whatever. And it was I attributed that to God, and because, and her generous spirit in these things. And I'm random, a random guy from a meetup group or whatever is hosting a biking weekend, and so I end up in these places, meeting people, sharing time, sharing space, and not wasting any of that time doing things that you do on retreats, for example.
Or having to navigate his ulterior motive to save your soul.
Right.
Yeah.
That too.
That's always
so when I would think about retreats, and you would have speakers and then prayer time and then Bible study, and then you'd have 2 hours of free time on Saturday. And it was really all about that 2 hours of free time on Saturday. You were going to go on a hike with your friends, and I did value these other things and wanted to value these other things, but it's you had to have this purpose, and you had to be challenged, and you had to end up crying, because of whatever your life.
Right. If it was going to be a truly spiritual experience, all of those elements would, or at least we're hoping so.
It's just drink and bike. Done. Right? It's not, you don't have to torture your soul when
so
you.
So Kristi, have you, as a cyclist, do you have, a pair of these cyclist pants that have pads sewn into the butt?
This is a heavy theistic question here.
Right. I happen to have enough of my own padding back there that I have never found a pair that worked for me. Yeah. So I literally wear like Old Navy capris. But everybody uses the butt shorts.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to benefit me at all.
Well, I have a confession because I have a pair of them on right now under my jeans so that I'll have a bigger butt. I'm sorry.
You're kidding.
I'm sorry, Bob. All this time you've thought my butt was this big. But
Yeah, well, I've really never considered your butt, but but I think I'll start now.
I know
So
you've been
thank you.
looking at it, Bob. that reminds.
I have nothing. I don't know how to react to that.
I know. It reminds me of that Eddie Murphy show where he's doing the Hey Norton,
Oh, yeah. Oh, the honeymooners.
the honeymooners.
Yeah.
And he's like, I know you've been looking at me.
That's right.
Anyway, forget that.
Yeah.
So Kristi, what other hobbies do you have besides cycling, or what do you do for fun? Do you have any movie interest or TV shows you watch?
Yeah. I like to do lots and lots of things. So I'm like the queen of Groupons and living socials. I'm like, always like, let's go try this adventure that they have, on Groupon. My boyfriend and I do a lot of kind of festivals that are around some sort of alcohol tasting. So,
yes.
beer fest,
sound like a
fun couple.
wine fests, stuff like that. So I love outdoors. I love music.
Do you have any pets?
I do. I have a dog. His name is Tico.
What kind of dog?
He is a Cavachon. He's half Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and half Bichon. And he's just like, if I could borrow the lenses through which he sees the world, it would just be an amazing place.
Right?
So,
That's the way I feel about my dog. They've got it. They've got life by the, just the sweet spot, I guess. It's just a nice perspective.
Yeah, dogs are great. They make us more human, I think.
So are you reading anything right now?
I am re-listening to the entire series of Harry Potter.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. I saw that on your profile that you were a big Harry Potter fan.
115 hours or something like that. So as I mentioned, I worked with youth mentoring for many years. And a couple of the young ladies who are now young adults and I are going down to Harry Potter World in a couple of weeks, which is part of Universal Studios Orlando.
Yeah.
But our entire purpose is Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And so I was like, before I go to Harry Potter World, I got to re-listen to everything. So I'm in the middle of book 7 now, so I'm almost done. I'm going to reach my goal.
Do you think that being a nurse, and it's maybe even especially in the HIV world, where you're surrounded by hardship and suffering, maybe, and that the genre of fantasy, maybe lifts you out of that. Is that any resonant with you?
Yeah, definitely. And I am not I do not like shows or movies that are really melancholy or dark. I just am like, that is not the reason I watch. I need my entertainment to be
fun and
entertaining.
lighthearted.
I mean,
feel
obviously
good.
you watch, documentaries that are hard sometimes or whatever. But I tried Mad Men. I was like, why would I watch this very depressing life? So I do like uplifting things.
Yeah.
And then in terms of favorites, I am a true child of the 80s, right? So I was 2 to 12 years old for the decade of the 80s. So that is my childhood.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of 80s favorites. I'm a really big Goonies fan.
Okay.
Can't Buy Me Love is the best 80s love story. If you haven't seen it, it's awesome.
Okay.
And it has Patrick Dempsey in it.
Oh, yeah.
Where he was Dr. Hotness or whatever he became known for. So Star Wars, Twilight Zone. I grew up on Twilight Zone. That obviously was reruns by the time I was watching it, but that was... I loved watching that with my dad. Princess Bride. So a lot of good 80s movies. My most recent feel-good thing that I love is Pitch Perfect.
Oh, yeah. Very big. My wife loves that. Yeah.
So
who knew? I saw that on your thing, and I don't know. I guess I gotta watch that.
Yeah,
check it out.
Check it out. It's a sweet movie. It's funny.
It's about a cappella, and it's
okay.
Yeah.
It's fun music, and they do all these mashups and stuff. And
well, the deal that we postponed was you had a niece born or something, or what happened?
A godson. Yeah.
Okay.
So he, one of the young ladies that I mentored since she was 6, she's 20 now.
Oh.
had a baby and asked me to be the godmom. So she has limited resources. So I was literally the only person in her life that has a car. So it was like, they could have taken a taxi home, but that's not so fun. Taking a new baby home in a taxi. So
yeah, Kristi, do you know that being a godmom, you have to make sure that the baby it grows up in the religion? Now what do you do?
It is ironic that I just became something with the title God.
Yes, I know. That's funny.
I think it's loosely, loosely used. So I'm going to take liberty with it.
Sure. Right.
Kristi, we're going to have to wrap it up, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. I kind of had to twist your arm to come on the show, and most of all, I want to thank you for your patronage. I mean, you're one of our patrons.
Well,
and she's been given to the show for some time, and we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, my pleasure.
Yeah.
I will say that I feel like I am more like an episode 8 guest instead of episode 80, because you have like increasingly gotten more, these very impressive people that have books and blogs and notoriety and
I get
stuff.
what you're saying, yeah. Your story is more back to those early shows. No, the thing is we try to intermingle both. I mean, we try to get people in here that don't have a book out. We try to get people, regular people that just have a story, because the power of story is universal. It's not just for the people who got a book deal. And
it's really helpful, I think, too, to a lot of people, because a lot of people are like you. They're in the same position.
Yeah, and they'll relate more to you than they will somebody with a big book deal or something.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
Great. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you, dear. Good having you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. So Kristi Kiger, man, and I think if the world was full of people that kind and sweet, my God, what a great world we'd live in. I remember being a pastor and a person like Kristi coming along and just drooling over a new member of the church that's this engaging and this concerned with social justice, and she's going to be the type of parishioner that jumps in and gets busy and does things and helps and is kind and is sweet and give Christianity a good name.
All very true. Yeah, she was great. She was terrific.
So as an atheist, I'm glad she's on our side. I hate this side stuff.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I thought she was very forthcoming. I mean, she really told us a lot about herself and unafraid to tell us about the unraveling.
And especially since it was only 6 months ago.
Yeah. Wow, she's really early into this.
She's moving quickly. Yeah. I mean, much more quickly than I did.
Yeah.
And maybe because of all the shows that, the podcasts that she listens to. I tell you what, when people have listened to Julia Sweeney and other podcasts, and they've watched other people like Ryan Bell and myself that have deconverted, it is a real shot in the arm of like, oh,
I'm not alone.
I'm not alone.
Yeah, exactly.
I can do this too. They did it. They're okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and that's one of the premises of the show.
Absolutely,
too. We want people to come on and talk to us to let others know that you're not the Lone Ranger out there. It's a hard thing. I get that.
So she goes to Mexico for a mission trip, and it's one of those cases where she got more religious than her upbringing.
Right.
She did, it was kind of and eventually her parents did kind of just let it wear out. It just waned into nothing. Whereas she got excited about being a part of the Love Club and the service machine,
Yeah, sure.
And then little by little, wait a second, and especially the stance on gay marriage.
Yeah.
And she was like, I've got friends that are gay, and this is just mean, and this is not what I signed up for.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. I've heard that as well. I like that she, I think because she is a scientist. I mean, being a nurse, you've got to know a lot of stuff about the body and how it works. Sure. And I'm sure that contributed something to it, at least her going on for her master's or whatever. She went back to school again. That was quite helpful to her, too. So
I think you can feel the fatigue. You could hear the fatigue in her voice as she was describing how hard it was to keep piecing these puzzles together.
Right.
And that is what's going on. And you can hear, like when she described her sister's wrestling with transubstantiation, in that, I don't know why they don't just call it a metaphor. I mean, everybody knows that's what it is.
I know.
And so those cognitive dissonances wear on you.
Yeah.
Because after a while, you can't juggle them both, and you have to pick one, and you don't really, like a person of conscience is going to resent being forced to pick one.
Yeah.
And you eventually say, no.
Yeah,
I'm going to look reality in the face. I'm going to let reality dictate. Right. And the second thing, I'm really just excited about this. It's not, like I said, it was an epiphany in a way to me this week, but there's no reason for God. And in fact, the only reason that we ever kept God alive, or the image, the imagination of God, was to almost, to prop him up when bad things happened, and to prop him up when good things happened. Right. I mean, literally, he's a corpse. Have you ever seen those movies where they carry around a dead person for a long time?
Weekend at Bernie's. Yeah.
It's literally there's nothing there, and we work so hard at the dead weight, of carrying around the dead weight of a God, of defending him when suffering happens and exalting him when great things happen, and it's completely meaningless. You take away salvation of the afterlife, and you've taken away any justification, mean, or need for God. There's just no reason to have one. Yeah. And nor does anything work when it comes to talking to him or asking him for help. Yeah, it's completely non-engaged.
I see like news stories on television, right? And there's some guy who couldn't walk, and he was put on a new type of you go in the water and you walk in the water to make you strong again, because you're hobbling around. He can't walk. Young man, well, in his 60s anyway, but couldn't walk.
It's a rehab type.
Yeah, okay. So he gets rehabilitated, and of course, what does he say? God helped me do this. Yeah. And it's like, well, what about that water? And what about that guy that had
you yourself doing it? You're the one that pushed one leg in front of the other.
Yeah, or any of those things where a scientific reason is the reason they're still alive, and they'll go, well, God wanted me to live.
It's just uncanny.
It's very strange.
And it becomes bigger and bigger mystery to me all the time, because I'm now looking back and going, at one point in my deconversion, I was in a panic state of what am I going to do without God? And now I'm wondering, what did it ever do with God? Like what did it ever mean? And what kind of delusion and illusion was I under to keep referring to this invisible friend that never talked back or did a goddamn thing? and so when something would happen, like you said, where the law of numbers and the odds of coincidence and everything happen, and then it's like, well, this is the psychology, and we're reading a book right now. We're going to have a guy on in a few weeks. The book is called The Mind of the Bible Believer, and I think it gets a little into the psychology of why this stuff appeals to us. And I right off the top of my head, I can think of like, all right, so if God, who's running the universe, cares about my rehab and water, or this touchdown that I just made or whatever, I'm pretty goddamn special. I've got the attention of God, and he's on my side, and he stopped what he was doing to help me make this touchdown. And so that just feels amazing, to the ego, I guess. Or like I've always said, that Christianity appeals to the darker angels of our nature.
I think that's true.
And you don't realize it until you're on the outside looking in, until you're a land animal, right? Well,
that's right.
I love that metaphor. Okay, we got to go.
All right.
Talk to you next week.
Great talking to you. Thanks, Cass. Always good.
All right. Bye-bye.